Hey everybody, it's Marie from Asian Boss. While the world is still occupied with dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, did you know that something else is making headlines in the Philippines? The new anti-terror law was just passed in the Philippines, which critics argue is bad news for human rights and freedom of speech. If you're protesting or speak against the government, could you be charged as a terrorist and potentially face lifetime imprisonment without parole under the new law? To find out, we invited two prominent Filipino lawyers with different positions on this law to discuss how it might impact average Filipino citizens. If you're interested in the public safety versus individual freedom debate, watch the video until the end and let us know your thoughts. Let's get started. Maraming salamat po sa pakisama nyo sa interview at oras ngayon sa amin. Today, we're here to discuss the anti-terrorism law, and we have here Attorney Bruce Rivera and Attorney Howard Calleja to get different perspectives on this terrorism law with two different lawyers. So, first of all, let's get to know your backgrounds a little bit more. What area of law do you practice?
Well, I'm Attorney Bruce Rivera. I am a graduate of San Beda College of Law. I have been in the academe for 10 years, but I took a leave in order to be part of media. I have a current show, Jack in TV in Radio 5, 92.3 News FM. We do news commentaries, and of course, I do a PNP or Philippine National Police public affairs show, Rectang Connect Action Agad in UNTV. I do in law school. I do teach constitutional law, of course, and international law and political law as a general whole.
So, you're a professor.
I was a professor for 10 years, but I had to take a leave of absence because I wanted to do other things.
Good afternoon, Marie, and your viewers. I am Attorney Howard Calleja. I'm a graduate of the Ateneo de Manila School of Law. I finished my international studies at the Duke University, North Carolina, and Hague Academy of International Law in Netherlands. I am a member of the Philippine Bar and of the New York Bar as well. I have been teaching law, currently teaching in the Ateneo School of Law and at the De La Salle School of Law, and a regular lecturer for our MCLE or Continuing Legal Education. And I run a law office, Calleja Law Office. I do a lot of litigation, criminal, election, and civil litigation.
Wow, so we have the right people to talk about this today. To your understanding, what exactly is the anti-terror law? Why should people even care about this? How will this affect normal citizens?
The anti-terror law is a law that is made by by the state, the Philippine state, that is to protect the common welfare and the safety of its people. Terror is more difficult to prosecute, to know, and to discover, and we have to be steps ahead of the terrorists. That's why this law was created, because to answer to our needs, and the statements and the prodding of the international community and the states, the Western states, for us to have a law that is comparable to theirs in fighting terrorism.
When you first heard that this law was passed, what was your immediate reaction?
Of course, my immediate reaction was maybe it's about time, because I think we all know that the Philippines is ranked ninth in the most terrorist driven or terrorist affected country in the world, even if we're such a speck, just a speck in the map. So I think maybe perhaps it was a welcome legislation. But of course, I expected it to cause an uproar in our community, especially when we are very concerned with individual human rights.
Although we agree that we need a law against terrorism, we need a good law that is consistent with the Constitution. That's why immediately July 4, we filed a petition for certiorari in our court, meaning we question the constitutionality of this law with a temporary restraining order, in the hope that our Supreme Court will stop the effectivity of this law, because we feel that since it is obviously on its face unconstitutional because of the wordings and how this law is written.
So both of you say that you want to eliminate terrorism and that's something to fight against. So
Yeah.
that's probably something that the majority of people, Filipinos, would want too. But then why is there so much controversy even within the country? Why are the opinions within the Philippines so split on this law?
Of course, there's always this concept of common welfare, common security, or public security versus human rights, individual human rights. When the state imposes anti-terrorism laws, the natural outcome of things would be individual human rights that will be a little bit limited because of the anti-terrorism law, because many of these laws would actually create disruptions on the right to privacy, on the right to the right to habeas corpus, on the right to on the right against arbitrary detention, on the right against warrant against arrest. So these are things that have always been a cause of friction between the the people who value human rights and who vis-a-vis the people who value public security, and someone has to give. And I think it's healthy for a democracy like us to be doing a constitutional challenge of a law similar to the anti-terror law.
I would agree with Bruce that we have to address terrorism, and terrorism doesn't know any time whether it's pandemic or not. It can take advantage of whatever. However, one of the main issues here, for example, is we have already stated we have our rights, and one of those is our right to life, liberty, and property with due process of law. Another one is, for example, free speech, freedom of association, freedom of assembly, freedom of travel. All of these are curtailed in this new law. For example, we are in this webinar or in this interview, or we know that we are very heavy on social media. Anything we write, say, or do, even emblems, even placards or speeches, can be curtailed and be deemed terroristic, or we will be deemed terrorist. Once they tag you as such, then without any judicial intervention, then you can be labeled a terrorist. It allows the law enforcer to take any person with notice to be with notice from the ATC to be held in custody for 14 days plus an additional of 10 days. So here we go now, tagging you without a warrant or a warrantless arrest. All of these things together with the Section 16, which talks about surveillance, to us, these are things that are inconsistent with our Constitution.
So for international viewers who might not know, how much of an issue is terrorism in the Philippines? How much terror is taking place in the Philippines in the first place?
We are constantly being threatened by terrorism. Our country is a training ground for terrorists. Our country has been attacked by terrorists in the past. We are still reeling from a terrorist attack in one of the primary Islamic cities in the Philippines. In 2019, we had the first Filipino, a homegrown suicide bomber, detonated a suicide bomb in the Philippines. So that is very, very important to note that unlike before, wherein the terrorist suicide bombers are Indonesians, Malaysians, or even foreign Muslims, we now have homegrown Muslims doing the act. And if they would reach Manila, that would have, it would be of epic proportions if they do the suicide bombings there.
And I also heard, actually, I don't know if you mentioned this before, but that there are groups of ISIS who actually went to the southern part of the Philippines.
Of course, because the Maute group wanted the blessings from the ISIS, so they wanted to the Marawi siege was one of their actions to prove to the ISIS that they are worthy of being included in the group and being part of the team.
Why does ISIS have the interest to go to the southern part of the Philippines? Do you know?
Because of our strategic position, perhaps, and the fact that we have a porous border with the other ASEAN and Muslim countries like Malaysia and Indonesia, having a porous border with the Philippines, but they can easily enter. And of course, if they attack the Philippines, it would create a lot of damage, and because we are part of the Western, or we are a democracy, that would even have a bigger stake on that matter.
Indeed, we have a long-going communist rebellion threat, which is the CPP-NPA. We have
Yeah.
a separatist Muslim group, which has been, I mean, there are a lot of peace treaties with them, but of course they continue, and they have segregated into some subgroups, which is the Maute, the Abu Sayyaf, and other groups. No? And I recognize that threats to the Republic, whether internal or external, should be addressed. I think in that thing, we have that thing in common with Attorney Bruce. However, in addressing these threats, Marie, I have to keep in mind that the safeguards, not only against terrorists, but against the tyranny and oppression of the government, is the Constitution. I am here fighting not for or against any group, but fighting for the implementation to uphold the Constitution and the republic which we stand for.
We understand that this law was fast-tracked by President Duterte. Is that true, and why did he do that?
There has been a resurgence of the CPP-NPA, which now have been recruiting youngsters and minors, even to the point of indoctrinating them, and recruiting them from from OFW families. They are cajoled, or being enticed to go to the mountains, and later on they are being made to fight, and some of them die in battle, being brainwashed. These are things that made the president decide for to fast track it, and many of because of the outcry and outpouring of emotion of many parents, and of course the death of our defenders, our soldiers, and our PNP. Which for me, I think, I know that they are not perfect, but at this point in time, they have also been victims of our policy and our laws that disabled them to fight, or to even launch a veritable front against terrorism.
So would you say that people who live in the southern part of the Philippines are more likely to support the law because they're more directly affected by it than, let's say, Luzon?
I suppose so. In southern Philippines, it's clearly a daily existence, or a daily problem. Many in Maguindanao, for example, they had to leave their homes in the middle of the COVID pandemic because of fighting between the Muslim separatists and of course the military. Of course, there have been cases wherein I think 20 soldiers died because they were attacked by, I think, the ASG and even Flinter groups. So it is a problem there, and I think that's the reason why the president saw it fit to fast track it into law.
A lot of critics are against this law because they say that it can be used against human rights and even shut down the opposition to the current Duterte administration. Attorney Rivera, what is your response to this?
I think it's difficult to say shut down the opposition, because if you notice, the opposition can talk, can talk. Nobody in the opposition are being killed, decimated, or even placed under the ground. Everybody's free to talk. So I think saying that if we can decimate the opposition is a little bit out there. People can openly call President Duterte names, and nothing is done about it. It's part of free speech, or so to speak. To think that it can be a vehicle for abuses, then all the laws can be vehicle for abuses if we actually if they can find a loophole. And for me, I've learned that no legislation is perfect. But the good thing is that this law before it's being implemented, it goes to the Supreme Court. So for me, that's a good thing.
So, Attorney Kalia, what's your response to this?
That's why we are saying it's a very dangerous law. It's not only to shut down the opposition, but you have to remember, Marie, that among our rights is to bring public grievances to the government. This is what we call a chilling effect. It means that before you were right, you don't even know if what you were right would be considered against the government. If you say that it is your advocacy to ask for good governance, but then again, it would be interpreted again by the super body of the ATC that say, because of your writings, because of your postings, you are inciting to commit terrorism. Then the chilling effect is that because you don't know, because of the vagueness, you would rather not write. You would rather stop yourself. You would rather restrain from doing such acts. So that's why we are saying that it can be a way to silence the opposition. I am not part of the opposition. I don't have any party to say with. I am not with any political party, as I said. And yet I hear being tagged myself just by filing this petition as a terrorist supporter. I am, again, repeatedly, I abhor terrorism. I am one with Bruce to fight terrorism. And I am glad that Bruce is happy that we are now in the Supreme Court. And I will even give him an invitation to join us and help us clarify this law with the Supreme Court. I mean, I do not have the monopoly of knowledge in fighting this in court, but anybody's help, everybody's support, just to clarify, just to straighten things out so that everybody will be aware, everybody will be educated on how to implement this law, whether it would be constitutional or unconstitutional.
So what is the definition of terror as defined by the law?
Well, it's a very, it's a very long definition. Basically, it's an act or an act which pertains to threat to commit terrorism, planning or training or preparing or facilitating commission of terrorism, a conspiracy to commit terrorism, proposal to commit terrorism, inciting to commit terrorism, recruitment to and membership of to an organization which is a terrorist organization, foreign terrorism, and providing material support for terrorists. Well, in a way, these are a little bit all-encompassing, but that's the reason why there is an anti-terror council, because the council will define the limitations and of course, most especially when it is said that you can arrest someone, usually the warrantless arrest is on an act which is already under surveillance. For example, if a person is about to, bomb a building or bomb perhaps a government installation, that's the time that the police or the local government or the local government authorities will or the authorities would have to do the warrantless arrest, because the basis of it is of course personal knowledge that that an act is about to be committed.
The definition of terrorism, it is not clearly defined under this law. Even if you look at the definition of terms in section 3, it says who is a terrorist individual. It says those that have engaged in acts in sections 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. An example of section 4, which is the bodily harm or the extensive destruction to government facility or private property. It is so vague. And who will define that? See, the question here is, under our system of justice, it is the police, it is the patrolman down there, even if they say that they have trained them well. I have trained many policemen, gave many seminars over and over. And sad to say, there are still some law enforcers who do not understand. A lot of them are good. A lot of them are nice. And a lot of them are well-meaning. But if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them that are not, then there is your danger. In addition, you allow them with this law to make legal something that is illegal.
Even if the police will be successful in their abuses, we can always imprison the police. We can always exact accountability from the president, even so that he will or even people in his cabinet or even those who created the law. But we cannot exact accountability when the terrorists become successful, because then we would not either we would not have caught him, or we cannot catch him because he's already part of those who are dead along with many of our citizens. So for me, I think that's the value, or that's the choice those are the choices we have to choose, either this or that. And for me, I think, it's not a hard bargain or not a hard choice to take, taking into account the threat. To presume that all of the police are close-minded and narrow-minded is a little bit like, it's actually, this putting down the whole police, the whole PNP and the whole AFP as an institution. Secondly, if you look into, the members of the ATC, as we are assuming that all of them are going to be killers, dictators, and, those who would want to kill Filipinos and kill enemies. For me, I think the reason why there is an ATC, an Anti-Terrorism Council, is because they are made up of cabinet members who are there because they have the trust of the president, that they elected because the people elected the president. So therefore, there is an element of trust that is between the two, and of course, it will be the president who will have the final, the ultimate accountability, the ultimate person who will be accountable for all the negativity or all the things that is done by the ATC. It is in a way saying that, we don't trust the president, we don't trust our president, we don't trust our police, we don't trust our officials, we don't trust the executive. When in fact, this is an act done by the legislative, giving the executive a little bit of leeway on how to make their jobs better in fighting and in catching terrorists. I think yes, there is a natural fear uh, regarding regarding our institutions, but in this time we're in, we only have to trust our law officials and our police and our military to keep us safe. Um, how can we protect ourselves from the terrorists if even those who are tasked to protect us, we are afraid that they will do something bad to us?
For example, warrantless arrest. Warrantless arrest, general rule, is not allowed. A warrant is only allowed if given by a judge and through probable cause. So those are the safeguards. Warrantless arrest because of these reasons, or a warrant given by the judge by probable cause. Under this law, the judge is not included in this detention, in the holding a suspect in detention. However, it is only the ATC, the Anti-Terrorist Council, upon notice. They didn't even have to go through a judicial proceeding because it's not even a quasi-judicial body. It is an executive body. We have to remember that warrants is in the province of the judiciary. So it is an overbreadth of the functions, again, of the judiciary because it is given now to the executive. So what happens here? The ATC gives the law enforcement a notice, and that notice will be used by the law enforcement officers to what? Detain a person for 14 days without any cause or without any crime, extendable to another 10 days, so a total of 24 days. And then we go now to the other unconstitutional provision there, which is custody longer than 3 days. Under our law, custody under Section 125 is only allowed between 12, 18, and 36 hours, depends on the gravity of your crime. And that is on a normal circumstance. Now, in an abnormal circumstance, when the writ of habeas corpus is not in place, our Constitution gives a safeguard. And what is that safeguard? That you should be uh, charged of a crime within 3 days upon arrest. Here, you are not charged of any crime within 24 days. So that is again outside the realm of the Constitution.
Attorney Rivera, what's your response to this?
Number one, I do believe that it's not a violation of the Constitution because the Constitution allows our laws, though it said that there is a need for a warrant, allows warrantless arrest. And warrantless arrests are, are allowed under number one, if you're about to commit a crime, is committing a crime or has just committed a crime. And number two, when a crime has been committed and the police or the arresting officer is sure that that person has committed the crime. The surveillance is not it's not the arrest per se. It is the ability of the police officials or the authorities to hear, overhear, or even look into possibilities wherein crimes are being contemplated, of being about to be committed. So I don't think they can arrest a terrorist without the actual when they're about to commit a crime, because in the first place there are liabilities and punishments for these officials: 10 years, 12 years penalties if proven that they have not been diligent in what they have been doing. It is for the purpose of gathering evidence that is the reason for the arrest.
On the issue of the 10 years that Attorney Bruce has brought up, it is not 10 years imprisonment for a wrongful arrest. It is very clear. It is only 10 years, I would read you just to clarify, if the individual of the police, law enforcement, or military personnel fails to notify the judge. It is 10 years if you did not tell that, for example, Marie is in prison. That's it. But if I imprisoned Marie for 24 days, wrongful imprisonment, after 24 days, I did not find anything against you, Marie, for any terrorism acts. Even if I detained you for 24 days, I cannot be charged with that. What is another basic right that is being inconsistent here? They're inconsistent with the right of freedom of speech, no? Because let me read to you just to be clear on Section 9, no, which says that any person without taking any part in the commission of terrorism shall incite others by means of speeches, proclamations, writings, emblems, banners, and other representations tending to the same end. Meaning, if you write in your social media, President Bruce Rivera is so and so and so and so. So of course, maybe if Bruce is president, he can term those individuals stating those things as terrorist or somebody who would do something unstable to the government. Already stated a while ago also is an exception, which is on the acts of terrorism under this new law, Anti-Terrorism Act, which says that there's an exception that it does not include advocacy, it does not include protest, dissent, etc. However, into that exception, there is an exception to the exception, which states, also in the same paragraph, which are not intended to cause death or serious physical harm to any person endangered or to create serious risk to public safety. Then again, that is the catch-all phrase. It already kills the exception. Now, under statutory construction, I'm sure Attorney Rivera will know this, if you have an exception to the exception to the exception is now the general rule. So how can that be now a safeguard? How can we now be safety saying that our advocacy is an exception?
Of course, the speech per se, when it does not pose a clear and present danger. For example, a speech wherein clearly it's meant as a jest, in jest, or even an expression, or even just hyperbole, cannot be taken as an act that is causing terrorism or inciting to terrorism, because because that is, it can be taken, that cannot be taken as a, as something that is causing clear and present danger, and they have to, you have to correlate that to the fact, or to the circumstances when a speech is made. And there's so many Supreme Court decisions that will allow us to determine whether or not that speech is a protected speech, or that speech is, is outside the ambit of, of the anti-terrorism law.
There has been a lot of protests to junk this anti-terror law, and they're pretty much saying that they're afraid to be mistaken for a terrorist where they're actually just an activist. So let me ask you this. Let's say there's a protest that fights for LGBTQ plus rights. Can protesters get arrested under this act, yes or no? This question goes to you, Attorney Rivera.
Honestly speaking, if you are in a despotic government, or a government that is, um, not free, autocratic, and want to trample on your rights, now, admittedly, any law can be used against, against lawful, lawful assemblies, and even, even normal governments have the propensity to make mistakes. For example, police who do not know, or who misapply laws, and that's common. Police brutality has been around even before. The U.S. has a problem. The people. It has also been a problem in many other Western states. When we talk about protest, we already know that what the purpose of the protest, and protest per se is allowed under our constitution. Protest is allowed under even assemblies are allowed. There is a purpose test and an auspices test, and in an assembly, if the purpose is, against human rights, against tuition fee increases, again against those who are discriminated against the LGBT, automatically we will know that these are not terroristic goals.
I just tried to put myself into the shoes of an average Filipino citizen who might be confused by this law and just wants to figure out what can I do, what can I not do, right? Attorney Kalea, if we go back to the source and look at section 4, it says that terrorism as defined in this section shall not include advocacy, protest, dissent, stoppage of work, industrial or mass action, and other similar exercises of civil and political rights, which are not intended to cause death or serious physical harm to a person, to endanger a person's life, or to create a serious risk to public safety. So this literally says that protests are okay, if I'm not.
That's why I think I tried to explain that a while ago, Marie, that the last phrase, or the last clause, which says, which are not intended to cause death, serious physical harm to a person, endanger a person's life, or to create serious risk to public safety, is the exception to the exception. The exception is that this law does not apply to advocacies, etc., etc., and then they give an exception to the exception. It's like a double negative. So under statutory construction, if you have an exception to the exception to the exception is now your general rule. And the problem here is, look at the last phrase, serious risk to public safety. Even if you look at section 3, which is definitions, what do they define serious risk to public safety? It is not defined. It is not clear. Then again, we go to the ATC. It is again the ATC, which will define what is serious, what does serious risk to public safety mean? And if they say that such rally, again, is allowed, however, your rally poses a serious risk to public safety, then they may term you or your organization as a terrorist, because it is a all-encompassing phrase that kills the exception. That is what we are saying. It is again vague. If you look at it, it is vague and overbreadth. It is too wide. You gave an example. You were an LGBT rally. They are fighting for their rights. But what if because let's say this current administration does not want, let's say, what are the issues? Let's say same-sex marriage for LGBT, for example. And then because of that, you say that down with this, or down with this government, because they did not agree with the same-sex marriage. So that is, to me, a valid exercise of advocacy for same-sex marriage for LGBT community. However, because of the line there, down with this government, because they do not support, then the other party or the military or the police can interpret it as, quote unquote, inciting to terrorism, because you're asking for the government to be, let's say, to be replaced or to be taken down because of that statement, or because of that they do not agree with your view as with the LGBT community. That's why I'm saying, if open-minded individuals like Attorney Bruce will be there, then maybe there will be no problem. But they will not always be there.
So you said that the people in the ADC are pretty much selected by the president, and that people should be trusting the government to protect the law. But it seems like, just given looking at social media, at the people, how people are reacting, how all these anti-terrorist law protests, there seems to be a massive distrust, just looking at that, from the people towards the government. Why?
Remember,
is that correct?
I think you should also look at the trust rating of the president, which is have always been on the higher, on the higher 70s and lower 80s, and they had always maintained that. I think the distrust is not on the president, but on the institutions, meaning maybe perhaps the police, perhaps because we have been under martial law. That is the reason why, and it has always been like placed in our heads that, it's bad. We have been trained to distrust our institutions, and we have always been suspicious about, institutions. And I think that's the reason why, we have been breeding grounds for all these terrorist groups, because we have already, half of the battle is won. Regardless of who is the president, we are all genuinely distrustful of our congressmen, of our police, everybody who is in government. We distrust. But at the end of the day, we have to try to change perceptions and try to really look into how our distrust may help us or may stymie us or put us down.
The Western media and even Human Rights Watch, they see this as an oppression of democracy.
To be honest with you, I think Attorney Calleja would also agree with me that the Western states have even more, anti-terror laws that are, really, really oppressive. When you go to Germany and you are said to be a terrorist, they can actually just upon returning, if you go to an area which is terrorist, wherein terrorism is abundant, like for example, Syria, when you go back, you can be imprisoned without question. In France, they allow you to be under village arrest, wherein you are held in a village and you have to report to the police every day just by being tagged a terrorist. In Australia, they can do not only wiretapping, but they can do a check in your bank accounts. So perhaps the Western media should look into their own backyard first before they go into ours, because many of the Western states have been victims to terrorism. The France, more recently, Germany, the US, and of course the Philippines, we have those problems. Indonesia as well.
It doesn't matter if Australian, American, German, or whatever country has other laws, or we compare to them. I cannot compare to them because I only compare with our constitution, and whatever laws we have should be comparable and consistent with our constitution.
Do you think the Philippines has a healthy democracy?
I think so.
I think so. We still have a healthy democracy, although imperfect,
Yeah,
still healthy. I mean,
i-
nothing's perfect, but I think
nothing is
it's
perfect.
still something that we can be proud of.
Yes, we have a democracy wherein people can say anything they want, and of course, they just have to be aware of the bashers and the trolls, and the effects of social media. But at the end of the day, we are allowed to talk. That's good,
Yeah.
and we are allowed to do anything.
So we've been through quite a few pro and contra arguments now, but is there any part of the law that you both agree on?
I think we agree on that we need a
Terrorism.
anti-terrorism law. We have to solve the problem of terrorism. But I think we may I hope Bruce and I can agree that we can have a better crafted law.
Okay.
Yeah, but of course, but my point is that at least we would have a law that may have teeth. Rather than not having a law, I would rather have a law that has a little bit of teeth rather than have a law that has no teeth at all. But anyway, what we agree together, of course, is that number one, we are ruled by law. Therefore, we have if the law is in question, we have to submit to the Supreme Court for a final ruling. And we also submit together that the Philippines is something worth fighting for. So that's why we're here.
So we have quite a number of people watching this from overseas. Is there anything you want to tell our global audience?
The only time the people in the outside of the Philippines will worry is when there is this kind of law wherein individual human rights may be regulated or may be like a little bit constricted and there's no reaction. That's the time that we get worried. That's the time that we will say, why are people not reacting? Remember, the president has a high rating, but the Filipinos do not just simply say yes to everything that he wants. There will always be those who will definitely say no or definitely disagree, and that is the good thing. The fact that you can hear disagreements, you can hear protests, and it is allowed, then don't then people should not get worried.
Both of you are very well educated lawyers. You know how to read a text, a written bill, pretty much. But how can people, the average citizens, how can they understand the law in a much better way? Because it seems like there's a lot of misinformation or misinterpretation of the law, which results in sensationalizing headlines, maybe, or harsh social media comments. So, how can people read through the law?
First of all, don't be lazy. Many Filipinos read only though they read those who they think will give an opinion agreeable to their opinion. So they already have a preconceived notion, and they will only read those opinions that they feel will side with them. That's the problem. I think Filipinos should be more proactive in reading sources which are untainted, which are a little bit, independent, or if they cannot understand the law, try to ask someone who they trust to interpret it for them, because that's the problem now. Many people make an opinion, stick to it, even if it's a wrong opinion, still stick to it because that's their belief, and it both parties are guilty of that.
Like to thank Marie and your viewers. I just hope that we keep an open mind. Awareness is key. Education is valuable. Um, I would just like to ask anybody who would just like to. It's best to read, be well versed with the law, not only because there is a constitutional issue, but should this be an effective law so that you also know your rights and privileges under this law.
So let's see how this law will actually play out. I'm sure that there's going to be some new headlines surrounding this law, where we might have to catch up and do a follow-up.
Yeah, would be more than
Thank
happy
you.
to have a part two, or
Yes.
3 or 4.
Thank you so much, Attorney Rivera and Attorney Kalea, for
Thank
giving
you.
different perspectives on this topic, which was highly needed. Stay safe and hopefully talk to you again.
Yeah, thank you. And
Thank you.
thank you, Bruce. See you
Thank you,
soon. Stay
Holly.
healthy.